Dear brothers and sisters, when the world drifts into confusion, when what is wicked is celebrated and what is holy is mocked, we must return to the stories the Church does not often tell, but should never forget. Stories whispered through time, heavy with truth, shielded from oblivion by the prayers of the faithful. One of these stories begins not in myth or legend, but in the sacred halls of the Vatican, in a chapel where the ordinary became extraordinary, and where the unseen world broke into the visible. It is the story of a pope, a moment of terror, and a message that still echoes through the silence of our disbelief. On October 13, 1884, Pope Leo XIII stood before the altar, a man of discipline, intellect, and deep spiritual sensitivity. He had just finished offering the holy sacrifice of the Mass, something he had done countless times before. But on this day, heaven did not remain silent. As he turned from the altar, something overtook him. Witnesses saw the Pope stop abruptly, his eyes fixed on something invisible to the rest. His body became still, his expression changed, drained of color, locked in awe or horror. Minutes passed. No one dared interrupt. It was as if time itself had stopped, and when he returned to himself, he looked like a man who had seen into eternity and come back frightened. What had he seen? At first he told no one, but he acted immediately. Back in his private chambers, as if moved by divine urgency, Pope Leo XIII sat down and began to write. What flowed from his hand was not just a reflection or a theological text. It was a weapon, a prayer forged in the fire of a vision too terrible to ignore, a cry for help, for protection, a call to arms directed not to men, but to the mighty Archangel Michael, commander of the heavenly host. These were not just words. They were a map, showing us that the battle is not coming. It is already here. These were his words. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. This was the prayer, simple in form, yet thunderous in its meaning. It was not written as a poetic devotion, but as a declaration of war, a spiritual line drawn in the sand. But why such urgency? Why such weight in the Pope's voice, in his eyes? Only afterward did the truth begin to emerge, whispered quietly among those closest to him, preserved in documents and memory. Pope Leo XIII had experienced something beyond this world, something that would haunt the heart of the Church for generations. During those few frozen minutes, the Pope had been caught up in a vision, an encounter between heaven and hell. Two voices, one calm and sovereign, the voice of the Almighty, the other sharp and venomous, the voice of the adversary. The conversation was not long, but it was enough to reveal the scale of the battle that was coming, a battle that would rage not on battlefields of earth, but in the hearts and minds of men. The devil dared to challenge the Creator. I can destroy your church, he hissed. God, without anger, simply asked, can you really? The devil, relentless, demanded, give me more time and more power. God replied, as though foreseeing the storm, how much time? The enemy responded, 100 years, and greater influence over those who surrender to me. Then came the divine response, not in fear, not in retreat, but with absolute authority. You have the time. You have the power. But remember this, my church will never fall. In the end, she will triumph. And thus began an invisible siege, 100-year permission, a period of deep testing, deception, and division. The Church, though eternal in promise, was about to pass through a century of fire. That is what Pope Leo XIII is believed to have witnessed. And from that moment, he was no longer the same. The weight of what he had seen, of what he had heard, pressed heavily upon him. He responded not with fear, but with action. In an unprecedented move, he ordered that the prayer to Saint Michael the Archangel be recited at the end of every Mass across the world. It was not optional. It was a cry of vigilance, a worldwide alarm. The Church, through every priest and every congregation, would now repeat these words daily. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in a battle. But this act wasn't just for his generation. It was a signpost, a warning meant to outlive him. Because what Leo XIII heard was not only a conversation, it was a countdown, a prophecy, a map that pointed toward a century unlike any before it. And then that century arrived, the 20th century, a century where hell seemed to pour itself onto the earth. War erupted across nations, first once, then again, more violent and more total. Oceans of blood, cities in ruins, genocides that stunned even the hardest of hearts. Communism rose, denying God and enslaving millions. Auschwitz, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the spiritual toll didn't stop there. Abortion became a right. The family once sacred was redefined and dismantled. Pornography wasn't just tolerated, it was normalized, sold, exported, consumed. But the final and most agonizing assault was the one that came from within. The church, pierced from the inside, confusion in doctrine, division among leaders, scandals that shattered trust, and an eerie silence where faith once rang loud. Apostasy, cold, quiet, and spreading. And it was precisely during this century, 33 years after the vision of Leo XIII, that another light pierced the darkness. Again, it was October 13th, but now the year was 1917. The place, Fatima, Portugal. 70,000 people gathered in a muddy field under a rain-soaked sky. And then it happened, the miracle of the sun. The clouds parted, the sun spun, trembled, descended. Even hardened skeptics trembled in fear. It was a warning, a sign, a supernatural echo of what Pope Leo had already seen decades earlier. Heaven was speaking again, but were we listening? And it was more than a spectacle in the sky. It was heaven's seal on a message of urgency. Urgent not just for 1917, but for every generation afterward. Long before cameras and headlines captured the miracle of the sun, the Virgin Mary had been speaking to three simple shepherd children, Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta. To them she entrusted a warning as clear as it was devastating, that Satan would indeed make a full assault on the church. She foretold that Russia would become the source of spiritual and material devastation, spreading error and darkness across nations. She called the faithful to a simple but powerful response. Pray the rosary every day. It was the weapon, the shield, the lifeline. But her message didn't end in despair. She gave a promise, a prophecy that echoes even now. In the end, my immaculate heart will triumph. Isn't that the same message Pope Leo XIII had heard decades earlier? The same confrontation between heaven and hell, the same warning, and the same unshakable hope. It's the same war, different battlefield, the same enemy, different strategy. But the promise remains unchanged. At Fatima, Our Lady didn't just ask for prayers. She gave instructions. She called for the consecration of Russia to her Immaculate Heart. She asked for the first Saturday devotions in fire, reparation for the sins committed against her. And she offered a call to deeper devotion, an invitation to enter the fire of her maternal heart, where purity and victory dwell together. And before Mary even appeared at Fatima, it was Saint Michael the Archangel who first came to prepare the children. The same Saint Michael who answered Pope Leo's cry. The same warrior who defends heaven still. He taught the children a simple yet profound prayer, one that carries the sorrow of heaven and the cry for the world's conversion. My God, I believe, I adore, I hope, and I love you. I ask pardon for those who do not believe, do not adore, do not hope, and do not love you. These were not just pious words. They were a cry of intercession, a plea rising from the battlefield of souls. All of this, every warning, every prophecy, every vision, was already present in seed form in what Pope Leo XIII witnessed that October day. His vision wasn't just a private revelation, it was a map of the century to come. A century in which Satan was granted permission to strike with fury, to test, to deceive, to divide. And if God truly gave the devil 100 years, then we are left with a sobering question. When did it begin? Some point to 1884, the very year of Leo XIII's vision. A logical starting point. But others, especially mystics and spiritual thinkers, point to a different, more unsettling date, 1929, the year of the Lateran Pacts, the year when the Vatican, after centuries without political power, was re-established as a sovereign state. It was, on the surface, a victory, an official recognition of the Church's independence. But in the realm of spiritual warfare, appearances often hide deeper realities. For many, this marked the true beginning of Satan's century, not through obvious persecution, but through the quiet poison of compromise, the slow erosion of truth, the rise of confusion from within. From that moment on, the enemy shifted his strategy, no longer at the gates, but within the walls. No longer a visible threat, but a silent infiltration, doubt, modernism, lukewarmness. The battle had entered its most dangerous phase, the phase of camouflage. And now, here we are. We are not at the beginning. We are at the end, the final years. The years when the mask comes off, when evil grows bolder, faster, more violent, and also more desperate. Because as the darkness thickens, so does the light of the promise. The Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Church will not be destroyed. The gates of hell will not prevail. And it is in this very moment, at the crescendo of this invisible war, that something extraordinary takes place. A new pope is elected, unexpected, unconventional, and he chooses a name not heard in over a century. Leo, a name that had been forgotten, buried in the past, but now revived, chosen, proclaimed, a name that draws a direct line back to Pope Leo XIII, to the vision, to the warning, to the prayer, a name that is not just a name, but a sign, a signal that the story is not over, that heaven is still guiding history, that even now, as the final battle intensifies, God is still speaking to his people, through signs, through names, through the ones who have ears to hear. Why choose that name? Why now? Is it just a coincidence? Or is it a sign? Many have asked this very question. Bishops, priests, lay people who are watching the signs with open hearts. Could it be that this Pope, by reviving the name Leo, is pointing us back to the beginning of the warning? Could he be saying without words, it's time? Time to wake up. Time to return to the prayer of St. Michael. Time to recognize that the spiritual battle isn't behind us. It's reaching its climax. That Satan's borrowed time is running out. And that heaven is preparing its final move. Through those who still have the courage to believe, to fight, to kneel. Let those who have eyes to see, see. Let those who have ears to hear, hear. Because this isn't about Vatican politics or theological trends. This is something deeper. It is the pulse of prophecy awakening again. It is the cry of the Church as she shakes off her silence and dares to speak to a world drowning in noise. A world that laughs at the idea of hell, denies the reality of sin, and puts its hope in machines, in artificial minds, in man-made progress. But behind the screens and steel, the real war rages on, the war for the human soul. And yet, even here, even now, God has not abandoned us. He never stopped acting. St. Michael still draws his sword. The saints are not silent. They intercede with power. Hidden souls still offer themselves like candles in the dark. Their prayers, unseen by the world, rise like incense before the throne. Quiet heroes, unknown warriors, carrying the burden of an age that has forgotten how to pray. Pope Leo XIII didn't stop with a short prayer. He also composed a longer and more potent exorcism, a prayer intended for priests, forged with spiritual authority, included in the Roman ritual, and still invoked today by exorcists to confront and cast out the forces of darkness. But what many don't realize is that its opening portion, the public part, was meant for everyone, for the faithful, for the front lines. It was never just a clerical tool. It was a weapon for the people of God, a weapon of light. But how many even know it exists? How many still wield it? In the years following the Second Vatican Council, that prayer faded into the background. Its daily recitation after Mass was suspended. The Church, in her prudence, believed the moment had passed, that perhaps the threat had lessened, that the world had shifted. But now we know. Those times weren't over. They were only beginning. And today, as evil grows bolder, no longer hidden, but celebrated, the response cannot be silence. The voice of faith must rise again, not with swords, not with rage, but with clarity, with conviction, with the courage to proclaim truth in a world that drowns in lies. Now is the time to reclaim what was lost, to bring back the prayer to St. Michael, not as a relic of the past, but as a shield for the present. It's time to teach it to our children, to speak it aloud in our homes, to make it part of our nights, our routines, our lives, not as superstition, not as a ritual, but as a cry from the heart, a declaration of allegiance to heaven. Brothers and sisters, the hour is late. The signs are no longer subtle. Heaven is speaking in every corner of the world. Mary is appearing. The saints are urging us. The mystics' visions, once dismissed, are unfolding before our very eyes. And the battlefield is not in some distant land. It is here, now, in every home, in every heart. And what are we waiting for? The time for hesitation is over. The age of comfortable Christianity is ending. We can no longer afford to be lukewarm, passive, half awake. This is not the hour for spectators. This is the hour for warriors, spiritual warriors, clothed not in fear, but in faith, armed not with anger, but with prayer. Today, each of us is being called to choose a side, to step out of the shadows, to put on the armor of light. Pope Leo XIII didn't leave us only a prayer. He left us a legacy, a prophetic voice echoing through time, a vision that was not just for his generation, but for ours. And now, as if on cue, another pope rises, carrying the same name, not as a coincidence, but as a summons, a signal, a voice crying out, the battle is still raging, but the victory is already written, because Christ has conquered, because the cross was not the end, but the beginning, because Mary's immaculate heart will not just endure, it will triumph, because Satan, with all his fury, is already defeated, and because Saint Michael the Archangel still rides at the front of heaven's army, sword drawn, commanding those who refuse to surrender. So now, right now, as you hear these words, close your eyes, silence the noise around you, take a breath, let your soul remember what it's made for, and join us. Let us now pray together the words that once made the gates of hell tremble, the very prayer breathed into the heart of a pope who heard the enemy's voice and stood firm in the truth of heaven. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. Brothers and sisters, if your heart joined in this prayer, if your spirit cried out with us, write Amen in the comments below. Let us be united, not just by clicks and screens, but by faith. Share this video with those you love. Pass on the light. And never forget, Satan was given his hour, but it will not last, because God will have his day, and that day is near. May the Lord bless you, guard you, and give you peace.